Hello, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Luis, and I'm the director of Bilingual Broadway. I am so excited to be here today. I've actually been wanting to make this kind of content for a long time, and I'm finally excited that I got around to doing it. A lot of people may know me from being a performer or maybe even from being an arts educator. But what a lot of people don't realize is that I also produce high quality musicals and plays for young people. I have done this for a long time, and I have seen and I have collaborated with a lot of folks, and I've seen some mistakes, and I've made some mistakes along the way. And I just want to offer some tips and tricks to other people who may be wanting to produce musicals, whether in high schools, middle schools, children's theater, community theaters. If you're in a situation where you are, with a tight budget and a dream, I really want to be able to support you and help you and just share as much as I can. So I hope that you enjoy this series. Today we're going to start with the very first thing that you're going to do, likely, which is choosing your show or your musical. Now, this video is assuming that you are producing a title that is licensable, not like you're creating or devising a theater piece of your own. Maybe I can make a whole other video about that, but I think that's a whole different beast. I also want to say that this is not a definitive way to choose your play or your musical. These are just things that have worked for me in the past, and these are guidelines that I've sort of made for myself, and I hope they're helpful to you. But obviously, if there's something that you think I'm missing, or there is something that you in particular should take into consideration, go ahead and add those in the comments, share it with us. I would love for this to be a community of people who are all aligned with similar goals and that we can all help each other out. So with all of that said, here is my checklist. Let's start easy. I feel like this is one where most people will usually agree this is where we start, and that is looking at your probable cast. Now, I'm not saying that you should go ahead and precast your show. That would be crazy, and honestly, I think it's a bad idea for many, many reasons. However, you do want to take into consideration what is your talent pool, right? Do you have a lot of dancers? Do you have great singers? Do you have some really funny actors? What is generally the ethnic makeup of your population is something that you really want to take into consideration as well. What is the culture of your population? These are all things that you really want to think about. In addition to that, you really want to make sure that you have a clear sense of who is in your group and what their work ethic is like. This is one of the reasons why I don't recommend coming in day one and saying, hey, this is the show that we're doing, this is the musical that we're working on. You really want to take time to get to know people, get to know their strengths, their weaknesses, of course. And I think overall, I'm always going to award kindness and a willingness to learn. For myself, I think that is way more important than talent or how high you can sing, or even your stage presence. So really make sure that you are taking consideration of the young people that are kind, that are leaders, and that are going to be able to lead your team with a high level of morale. That is something that is going to be so important, is that your leads are not only leads within the world of the play or the musical that you're doing, but they are also leading the company as a whole. So definitely keep that in mind. That is a huge consideration. So with that, if you have a show in mind, think to yourself, does this show fit my probable cast? Now, just as important as the cast, you really want to think about your probable audience. And this is especially important if you are looking to sell tickets or to encourage donations at your performances. Pretty safe to say that all of us want as many people to come to the shows as possible. We want as many warm bodies in the theater, right? So it's really important to consider what is going to be pleasant, what is going to be delightful to your audience. With this context, you want to be extremely aware of material that may be controversial, that may have heavy themes. even material that is religious may be touchy for some populations, so that is definitely something that you need to take into consideration. I'm not suggesting by any means that you should avoid controversial material. However, what I am saying is that you, as a responsible adult, need to be aware of where that controversy might live, and you want to make sure that you're handling it properly and that your production has a point of view about it. If you're working in partnership with any entity, whether it's a school or a community theater or anything like that, you definitely want to check in with them as well in regards to any title. And then ask yourself, does this show please my probable audience? Let's move on to staffing. Now, staffing is going to look different for every single situation, every production, every school, every theater is just going to look different. Some organizations just have more resources, just have more budgets, and they're able to kind of staff things a little bit more properly. But in many scenarios, when it comes to school musicals or community theater, you are really looking at staffing with people that can wear multiple hats at the same time. And that's definitely something that you want to take into consideration and that I want to acknowledge. So with that, you're always going to need a director. If you're doing a musical, you are likely going to need a musical director. And if you're doing a musical with dancing, you are likely going to need a choreographer. In any situation, even if you're dealing with a very plain set or scenic design, you also want to make sure that you have a technical director who can support you in that way. Take into consideration that certain shows may require additional staffing with specialized talents. And so a great example of this would be if I were to be producing Bring It On the musical, which happens in the world of competitive cheerleading, I would want to have a cheer consultant or a cheer coach attached to my show. So that is what I'm talking about. If I were to be producing In the Heights, then my music director would need to be very well versed in Latin rhythms, Latin music, and maybe even be a Spanish speaker. So that is something that you also want to consider. And finally, you want to plan from day one what everybody's responsibility will be on the day of the show or on the days of the performances. You may find that you may need additional staffing. A great example of this would be, I'm working at a school right now that has a green room available for us, but however, I'm required to have an adult in the green room at all times. And so that is part of the staffing that I need to cover. What's going to be super helpful here is if you make a spreadsheet or a list of everybody's name and what their exact responsibilities are. Ultimately, the question is, do you have enough staffing for this show? And now on to everybody's nightmare. And listen, I get it. We're all artists. We just want to create and we want to feel it and we want to be able to just do it. However, when you are producing something, that is your main priority, is to make sure that you're producing, that your finances are in check and they are in line with what you are able to do. A very common mistake that I see in this area are a lot of directors will choose the show, they'll take everything else into consideration, and then they're going to worry about the budgeting of the show later. And I highly advise against that. What I recommend is to have a very conservative version of your budget. And maybe this is a topic where I might make a separate video on, because I feel like this one we really need to dive into in great detail. But generally speaking, you want to be able to say, hey, I've got this much for costumes. I've got this much for sets. I've got this much for props. This is what I'm looking at for printing. Also, keep in mind that it is perfectly acceptable for young people to fundraise for their own experiences. Another common mistake that I see here is a lot of directors being scared to involve children in fundraising, and I think it's totally fine. I think that things like car washes and candygrams and bake sales are all things that are so successful, and they're such great ways to get kids to be involved in theater. I recommend it. And yeah, general rule of thumb, musicals are more expensive. That's just the way it is. So keep that in mind as well. So ultimately, is your budget sufficient for this show? Or do you have the capacity to fundraise? Now let's talk facilities. And this is another one where it's going to be completely different no matter where you are. Some of us are working in theaters. Some of us are working in cafetoriums. Some of us are working in black boxes. I mean, there's the full gamut of what we're working with, right? Where I see people go wrong here is that they look at the performance space and they go, great, we have the performance space. And they're not really considering all of the spaces that you are going to need for performances. So for example, where is it that your cast is going to hang out when they're not on stage? Where are they going to be making their quick changes if you have any quick changes in the show? Where is it that you are going to store your sets, props, and costumes when you're not using them or before the show opens? Where is your sound person going to sit during the show? These are all things that you need to consider. And what I recommend here is literally drawing or mapping out where every single person will be. And once you have that, you're going to have such a better idea of the capacity that your facilities have for a show or a musical. I'll give you a great example of a space I'm working in now. Such a beautiful theater, 600 seats, no wing space on the stage. And that is just what I'm working with. And so everything that I build for the show has to be foldable, or it has to roll up, or it has to be something that can be easily transported to an entirely different room altogether. And these are all things that I have to take into consideration. Now let's talk about equipment. Here's the thing about equipment, and here's my opinion. I believe that if you are producing a show, you should have at least basic knowledge on sound, lights, and the use of power tools. I think that that is going to set you up for success, and you are going to be able to have better, clearer communications with people that you bring onto your team. So if you don't have basic knowledge on how to set up a light rig or how wireless sound works, I'm talking frequencies and bands and groups and channels, and you know, some basic knowledge on power tools, I recommend that you get on YouTube and that you start watching some videos, because again, that is going to be key to your success. When it comes to equipment, you want to make sure that you know exactly which equipment is available to you and make sure that it's working properly. When it comes to equipment, keep in mind that you're working in a theatrical setting. And so little cheap things that you find on Amazon are likely not going to serve you that well. They're certainly not going to serve you in the long term. I can't tell you the amount of times I've tried to work with a school and I've asked, hey, do you have sound equipment? And they go, yes, we do. And what they mean is that they have a Bluetooth speaker. I think that this is an area where this might be an entirely different video. If you're interested in me doing something like that, definitely drop a comment below and let me know. From my experience, I see that this is an area where folks are relying on volunteers, or they're relying on a friend to come in and help. And I think that's great, and it may even be necessary. But I do want you to take this into consideration and to keep in mind that you're only going to set yourself up for success more if you have at least a basic knowledge on how these things work. So ultimately, the question is, do you have enough equipment to fulfill this show? And if not, do you have the budget to purchase it? Now let's talk about you. You are very important in this equation. Your knowledge and your talents are extremely important to the success of your production. And I don't feel like we talk about that enough. Your production should align with your knowledge, and it should align with your talents. Ultimately, you are going to be working with this material, listening to these songs, dancing to this music or whatever for a very long time. And if you're in a school setting, you're going to be listening to this music in school, and then likely after school, and then likely on weekends. So ultimately, do you like this material? Is this something that you want to spend your time on? And keep in mind that you are the responsible adult here. So you should have extensive knowledge on this material. You should dig this up. You should be eating this up. You should be reading the book. You should be watching all the movies. You should be reading the material over and over. We'll get to that later. You should be an expert. And so keep that in mind too. And so the question is, are you knowledgeable about this material? And do you ultimately like it? Now let's talk about your environment. You definitely want to do an environmental check. And what I mean here is that you want to check what kind of productions have been done by nearby children's troupes or community theaters or nearby high schools. You actually want to avoid doing titles that have been produced recently. You may be alienating some of your audience that way, which goes back to your probable audience. And also, if everybody is doing the same show in the same area, it just gets messy. It creates confusion and nobody wins. Also, check for themes or topics that may be triggering to your community. I'll give you a great example of this. One of the shows that was offered to me this year is a show that I love. However, it deals with border crisis and family separation. And I'm just looking at it and I'm like, I don't know. It's 2025, and with everything happening in US of A, I don't know that I want to deal with that, and I don't know that I want that to be the main topic or theme of my show. Does that make sense? So definitely keep that in mind. Am I saying that that completely ruled it out? No. However, I chose to not have that be the focus of my program because I would rather my program or my musical, my show, live in joy and live in love rather than like deal with tragedy. Hope that makes sense. Ultimately, the question is this show appropriate for your environment? Now let's talk applications. I think that anyone that is working with young people has a responsibility to think about this. However, I think that this is especially crucial if you are working at like a public school, a high school, something like that. So every show that you do, no matter what, is going to have themes, topics, is going to be set in a time period where you can apply that to other areas of interest. Keep in mind that young people are curious and they're going to ask you questions about everything. And so a huge consideration here is, do you have the bandwidth to have those conversations? Are those conversations that you are willing to have? I'll give you a great example. One of my dreams would be to one day direct a teen production of the musical Spring Awakening. I love that show. It's obviously supposed to be performed by teens. However, I cannot put myself in a situation where I'm going to be directing that show without some major support. I'm talking maybe a sex education nonprofit. I'm talking many, many intimacy coordinators. I mean, there are so many things that could go wrong if I were to just say, hey, I'm doing this on my own. And I'm just not comfortable doing that. And I don't think any of us should be. So keep that in mind. Consider that some topics may require professionals and some topics may require additional support. Also, for some real world applications, you may want to consider some outside workshops or master classes. And tying this back to budget, this might be a way that you can get an outside organization to sponsor some of your show, is if you're able to somehow tie it to, you know, a topic or a theme that they might want to cover. So think about that too, and you can be strategic about this. So ultimately, are there real life applications or connections that you're willing to make? This next one might be obvious, but I can tell you from experience, a lot of people don't do it. And that is review the materials. I'm going to say that again. Review the materials. And this goes back to, you have to be such an expert in the material, in the topic, in the text. I cannot tell you how many people I know that chose shows based on a version that they saw once 10 years ago. Hello, that is so crazy. You have to read the text. It is your responsibility to review those materials and try to see them with a fresh eye every time. And also, just because a title is categorized as a junior version or whatever kind of version, that does not mean that you are excused from reviewing the materials. You still have to do that. I actually directed Xanadu Jr. a couple of years ago. And the entire catalyst for the show is that the main character is about to jump off a bridge. And that is still part of the junior show. You can't get rid of it because it's the catalyst for the entire show. So keep that in mind, that even these titles have things that you may want to either avoid or handle with care. There's also a lot of titles out there that have references to people's bodies, body types, I mean, the list goes on, so definitely make sure that you review the materials and make sure that your entire team has reviewed the materials as well and that everybody is on the same page. So ultimately, did you read the script and did you review all the materials in great detail? Now let's talk about securing the rights, and this is again another one where I may do a separate video on this process because I realize a lot of people need help with this. But securing the rights is a juggle of what's available, what you can afford, and what you want to do. These are all things that you need to take into consideration. Also keep in mind that titles may be part of a licensing company's catalog. However, it may not be available, and there's a million reasons why something may not be available at the time that you want to license it, but definitely double check that. If you are in New York City, as I am, keep in mind that the process to get approval here usually takes longer. That's just the way it is here. What I recommend is that you have 2 to 3 choices that are ranked, and that way you end up with a title that you actually want. So ultimately the question here is, are the rights available and are they affordable? Now let's talk final decision. So after you've taken all of those considerations and maybe even more if you've had more things to consider, now you're at a point where there are no more checklists, there are no more bullet points. It is just you and the decision of which show you will produce. And this decision will either set you up for success or maybe for failure. We don't want that. I'll share a personal anecdote here, and that is that this year, at the end of my checklist, I had 2 shows that I was able to do and that were available to me. And both of those shows checked everything on the checklist. However, there was one show that stood out to me as something that I would rather spend my time on, as something that ultimately looked more fun, and something that just like sat right with me and my troupe of children. And that is the show that we ended up picking. If you're curious about which title I'm talking about, I'm so happy to share that this year my troupe is doing The Addams Family by Andrew Lippa, but it is a very special version of the show, one of a kind, never been done before. We're actually being allowed to do a 50-50 bilingual version of the show in English and Spanish, because here at Bilingual Broadway, we sing in non-English. And so I'm so excited. It's going to be playing this spring, and I'll share more info on that later. So with that, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you want me to keep making this kind of content, please drop a comment below. I'm happy to keep diving into more topics. There is so much more to cover. And I really hope that this is a resource for high school teachers and theater directors for young people that just need a little bit more support and that just need some guidance. And I really hope that we can create a community where all of us can help each other, because I believe that arts education, and I believe that theater and musical theater and dance and acting is something that everybody deserves. And anything that we can do to make that easier for everybody, I'm going to support. So thank you so much, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye.